Today we'll start Lamed Beis and Med Beis, Taner Rabbanan. Taner Rabbanan, it's about 10 lines from the top. Taner Rabbanan, no eichel kazayis shuma misham keren chaimish. Someone eats a kazayis of shuma. We're talking about that he's not a kayan, so he has to pay for that. It doesn't have to be on Pesach or anything like that. This is a regular story. So what does he pay? He pays the karen is the principal, and he adds a chaimish. Now, what we're learning here is that he ate specifically a kazayas. Would it be less than a kazayas, then it wouldn't apply. Abashal says that it's not the kazayas that we're looking for. It's the shabapruta that we're looking for. Lamed beis and beis. It's the value of it. My time at the Tanakama, what's the difference over here? The Tanakama says that it's the kazayas, that's what incurs the payment in the chaimesh. And Abashal says it's the value. The Tanakama says, Pasuk says that if a man will eat kodesh, which is here is referring to truma, bishkaga, by mistake, that's when he's going to have this halacha. It says yoichal, he has to eat. There's no eating less than a kazayas. So once it's a kazayas, he's chayav. Abashal, my timer, what's the reason for Abashal? Amakra b'nasan says that he has to pay. B'nasan l'kayin asakayidash, whatever he has to pay the holies to the kayin. Yeah, he can only pay if it has a value of a pruta, or else it's not considered a payment. V'idach nami yaksiv yaichal. V'idach over here is the same. It's a strange way of saying same person. What does Abishal do? It says yaichal, it says to eat. Abishal says that the size didn't matter. It was the value that mattered. It was the shabapruta. It says yoichal. It says that it has to be something that's worthy of being eaten, which needs to be the size of a kazayas of an olive. It says prat l'maza kudasa. That's not telling me the volume of the food. That's telling me that it has to be eaten as opposed to being damaged. If you just take it and destroy it, even though it wasn't yours, but you don't have to add a chaimish to that. That's not a prohibition of a zar having benefits from truma. Okay, the Tanakama aksiv v'nasan. What about the Tanakama? It says v'nasan that it needs to. V'nasan Abishal learned that it needs to be a shavapruta. What does Tanakama do with v'nasan? They hold that it doesn't. They don't care how much it costs. They only care that it's the volume. It says it needs to be that it's able to become kodesh. Now, what that means is that it needs to be the type of produce that could become truma. That's what you have to give to the kayan. Remember, we said that you replace truma with fruits. Prat leichel trumas chametz for Pesach. This is in parentheses. That's another example of something that can't be used as a repayment. You can't use chametz for you can't give truma as chametz on Pesach. You're going to see it a little bit later. You'll see on the next page. Okay, whatever the case is, they take the word v'nasan and they say it's not coming to tell me its value, the value of the truma that you ate. It's coming to tell me what type of truma. Okay. Taner Rabbanan, another brayso. Arichol truma pachas mikazayas. You eat less than a kazayas. Mishalim esakeren, ve'ina mishalim esachemish. You just repay for what you ate, but not the extra chemish. Hechidami, what's the story over here? Idalas be'shavapruta. Does it have the value of a shavapruta? If it has less than the value of a shavapruta, karenami le'lashalim. You shouldn't have to pay the karen either. I think we're following Abishal. That's what it seems like. Abishal says that you would only have to pay if it has a Shava Pruta. Here I have a brisa that says not. That says, well, we don't know what the brisa is saying, but if it doesn't tell me that it needs to be a Shava Pruta. Yeah. 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 Or a grape wine. Well, whatever it is. Yeah. Whatever it is. We'll see, does he get it? But if it comes to Me'ila, there's other things. But over here, here we're just dealing with the payment. He's paying it to a Kayan. Yeah. He drank a shot of very expensive wine. Thank you. Okay. So we're talking about that he ate less than a kazayas. He has to pay only the principal. He doesn't have to pay the extra fifth. We're asking what was its value. If it's less than a Shava Pruta, then you shouldn't have to pay anything. If it is a Shava Pruta, and if it is a Shava Pruta, then then you should pay the extra fifth. According to Abishal, Abishal didn't care about the kazayas. So, you're using a term here that doesn't have any significance to us. Ask the main question, was there a Shava Pruta? And then everything is applicable. The Gemara says, Lo'ilam dispe Shava Pruta. Really, this case is talking about that there is a value of a Shava Pruta. It is a value of that small coin. Nevertheless, there's no kazayas. You don't pay the chaimish. Okay, the Gemara is going to continue to discuss this. Amru Rabbanu Kamei Rav Papa. The rabbi said this over to Rav Papa. This interesting thing that it has a Shava Pruta, and therefore there is a repayment, but it doesn't have a kazayas, so you don't have the chaimish. They said it to Rav Papa. Said Hadalai Kabashal. It doesn't fit with Abishal. Why? The Kabashal Ha'amar Kivan Shiesh B'Shava Pruta Avagud Lasbu Kazayas. It should be a full repayment together with the chaimish. Once it has a Shava Pruta, Abishal said that the only concern here is the value, and here it has the value. Amalu Rav Papa says to them, Afilu Tema Abishal. You could actually learn that it's going according to Abishal as well. Why? Abishal Tartibay. See, we didn't know that. But Rav Papa says Abishal requires both. We thought that the machlekes was a polar machlekes. The Tanakama held we only care about the size, the volume, that it's a kazayas. Abishal says I only care about the value, that it's a Shava Pruta. Comes along Rav Papa and says no. The Tanakama only cared about the volume, but Abishal says volume and value. And if you don't have the kazayas, then although you have to repay, but you don't repay the chaimish. I think he's volunteering. Yeah, it's a debt. He has to pay it back plus a fine. Umar says, Abishal Tarti. Is this a good answer? Does Abishal actually but restricts the halachas of repayment of truma only if you have both kazayas and the Shava Pruta? Latanan, we have a Mishnah. Abishal Eimer sheyesh b'Shava Pruta chay b'tashlumen, she'ein b'Shava Pruta ein chay b'tashlumen. If it has a Shava Pruta, it has to be repaid. If it doesn't have a Shava Pruta, it doesn't have to be repaid. Okay, so far we don't know what else there is going on over there. Mulai, the sages said to him, Lo Yamar Shava Pruta Linyan Mila Bilvad. You know where it says Shava Pruta? That's by Me'ila. Me'ila is when you have personal use from Hektish. That's where it says Shava Pruta. Not by Truma. By Truma, it says Achila, and by Achila, it means a Kazayas. Over there, it doesn't say Achila. Over there, it says, I forget the pasuk over there, but it says, it's missing the word Achila. So over there, the significant thing is is the value, the Shava Pruta. Abel Truma in Chayev at Sheba Kazayas. You're not Chayev until there is a Kazayas. Now, those words, Ad Sheyeheba Kazayas, sounds like they were arguing about a case where Abba Shaul said that you're Chayev because it had a Shava Pruta. And the Tanakama says, the Rabbanan say that you're exempt because it doesn't have because it's not a Kazayas. Now, if Abba Shaul required both Kazayas and the Shava Pruta, then the expression over here was Avalatrume in a Chayev ad Sheba Kazayas. It shouldn't have said that. The Im Isa, if we'll accept Rav Papa's teretz, that Abba Shaul requires a Kazayas and the Shava Pruta, Kivan Sheyesh by Kazayas mi baile, not ad Sheyeheba. The Tanakam was saying that it's Chayev b'tashlumin because there's a Kazayas, and Abba Shaul was saying no, there's no Shava Pruta. And the Tanakam was saying we don't care about the Shava Pruta because here it has to do with Achila. Shava Pruta is a din in Me'ila. If Abba Shaul doesn't require a Kazayas, then the reading of this brisa fits because they said you're not Chayev because there's no Kazayas. And Abba Shaul says you are Chayev because there's a Shava Pruta. And then that would mean Abba Shaul doesn't care about the Kazayas. That's different than Rav Papa. And that's what it says. It says that Tanakama says you're not Chayev because there's no Kazayas. Abba Shaul says yes, you are. Clear that Abba Shaul doesn't hold it. You need a Kazayas. Now the Gemara says, Va'af Rav Papa Hadabe. Even Rav Papa retracts from this that Abba Shaul requires a Kazayas as well. Now, in order to follow this, what's going to happen is we're going to quote a brisa and a discussion on the brisa, and Rav Papa is going to come in at the end and make a comment, which is going to prove that he holds that Abba Shaul only requires the Shava Pruta to make the repayment. That's going to take place on Lamed Gimel, Amud Aleph. We're going to get to the conclusion. First, we get lost in the discussion, and then we get back to it. But this discussion is going to take us through the rest of our, pretty much the rest of the Amud on Lamed Gimel. So it goes like this. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. B'chata b'shgaga. Talking about the Karban Me'ila. If someone has personal use from consecrated items, so it depends. He had this benefit from these consecrated items, so it depends if he had the benefit b'shegeg or b'mezid. If he had the benefit b'shegeg, that means that he didn't realize what he was using. He didn't realize that it was consecrated. So then he has to bring a karban, a shamilas. He has all the halachas of Me'ila. If he was b'mezid, he knew what he was doing, then the rule is that it's misa b'dei shemayim. It's a death penalty from heaven. It's a little different than karis. We're going to have a discussion here, which one's more severe, karis and misa b'dei shemayim. We'll see that in a moment. So it says, v'chata b'shgaga, if he sins unintentionally, prat lemezid. Why does it say b'shgaga? That's excluding if he sins intentionally. If it's intentional, then there is no karban. The Gemara says, why do I need a pasuk to tell me that? That I can learn from a Kal V'chomer. I don't need the pasuk with the diuk to tell that to me. It says like this: when it comes to other mitzvahs that incur the karis punishment, for example, someone that eats forbidden fat, someone that eats blood, so there's karis. Pater b'emes hamezid. Now, pater b'emes hamezid means if someone eats forbidden fat or blood, he has to bring a karban chatas. He has to bring a karban, but he only has to bring a karban if he eats it b'shogeg. If he does it b'mezid, then the karban doesn't apply. So when it comes to things that are very strict, for example, chelav and dam, which incur karis, But nevertheless, the carbon is only on a shogeg, not on a mezid. So pater bemes a mezid. There's no carbon by the mezid. Me'ila she'em bakaris. Me'ila is much more lenient. There's no karis by me'ila. Ein adin shepater a mezid. So for sure, if it's b'mezid, there's no carbon. If things that are very strict, the carbon only applies to shogeg. Things that are less strict, the carbon should only for sure not go further than a shogeg. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that there's no carbon by a mezid? I have a kal v'chomer. Even other things that are stricter than that, there's no carbon by a mezid. Gemara says like, that's not a good kal v'chomer, and therefore you need the pasuk. Me'ila is stricter than all of those other things. Me'ila has misa b'dei shamayim, has a death penalty from heaven if it's b'mezid. So I would think that, this is a much stricter halacha than chelev and dam. That's only kares. That's only kares. So over here, where there's misa, over there by the chelev and dam, you bring a karban if you ate it b'shogeg, but not b'mezid. Fine, it's not so strict. But over here by meila, it's much stricter. If you have enjoyment from consecrated items, b'mezid, there's misa b'dei shamayim. And maybe over here there's a carbon as well. It's stricter. Talmud Laima, the pasuk comes to tell me b'shgaga pratu mezid. There's no, only b'shogeg. Okay, that's the brisa. V'amali Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rav Chia bar Avin. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says to Rav Chia bar Avin, Hai Tana. Obviously, when you look at this discussion, the first Tana, the Tana that's not arguing, that's going back and forth here, saying, do I need the pasuk? Why do I need the pasuk? And then I do need the pasuk. Mi'ikara alima le'karis, l'b'seif alima le'misa. Obviously, at the beginning, he thought that karis was stricter than misa. And at the end, he thinks misa is stricter than karis. So Rav Chia bar Avin tells to Rav Nachman, Hachi Kamer, that's not necessarily so. It's not necessarily so. We can learn this a little different. Like, im amrit b'shar mitzvahs kin lechayiv b'em misa b'pachis mikazayis. By other mitzvahs, by chelev and dam, you don't even have misa. If there's less than a kazayas. We know that karis is stricter than misa. That's what Rav Chia bar Avin is saying. Karis is stricter than misa. So why do I need a pasuk? If by those other things there's no carbon, by meila, which is less strict, for sure there shouldn't be a carbon by a mezid. So the response to that is that I know that when it comes to the punishment, the chelev and dam is stricter. It has kares, and this is only misa. But look at it differently. Those other items, you're only chayiv if you had a kazayas. By meila, you're chayiv even without a kazayas. Why? Because it doesn't say achila by meila. So we have a stringency by meila. You have a stringency by meila, that would tell me that just because those other things don't have a carbon for mezid, but if it's done for mezid, that doesn't mean that meila doesn't have a carbon. Meila has an extra stringency. It's you're chayiv even if it's less than a kazayas. It's a maybe you're also chayiv a carbon if it's for mezid. But Amalei, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Tinuach daitcha she'nach bes daiti." Thank you very much. You gave me a good answer. You could be relaxed. Like Yitzi says, take the rest of the day off. You've settled my mind. I'm happy. I see clear now that I don't have to say that answer that I said before, that first he thinks kares is stricter, then he thinks that misa is stricter. No, kares is stricter. So how did he change his mind? It's because it has to do with less than a kazai. So he says back, this is funny that he says back, he just gave the answer. Rav Chia bar Avin says, why are you so satisfied with the answer that I gave? It's actually not a good answer. The Rabbah of Rav Shesha Shadabu Narga, Rabbi and Rav Sheshes threw an axe into this answer. It's an expression. That means they showed that there's a problem with it. They asked the question on Man Shamet Le the Amar Hizid B'Mila B'Misa. Who's the one that says, we're on the top of Lamed Gimel, who's the one that says that if someone intentionally has enjoyment, has benefit from consecrated items, that there's Misa B'Dei Shemayim? Rebbe. It's the opinion of Rebbe. The Tanya that was taught in the Brisa. I remember I was one year summer, I was in Antwerp, and I was sitting in the shul with a friend of mine, Chabad shul over there, and this guy comes in, no beard, just looks like a simple guy, you know. Anyway, my friend tells me this guy knows the whole Shas by heart. He said they used to bring him to the yeshiva, and he would talk to the bachrim. It was like a whole show. Anyway, I don't remember his name, but his discussion with us was Me'ila b'mezid. What happens by me? A carbon Me'ila. Do you bring it to b'mezid? We didn't know this Gemara. He was telling us, no, the Gemara Pesachim, Me'ila is only b'shegig, not b'mezid. B'mezid, it's Misa B'dei Shemayim. Okay, it was this Gemara. Anyway, where do we get this from? It's the Tanya that's a brisa. Hizid b'me'ila. If someone has personal benefit from hektish, and he does it b'mezid. Rebbe Yomer b'misa v'chamer b'azhara. Rebbe says that there's misa, there's a death penalty, and the Chum say it's just a negative prohibition. Okay. My time with the Rebbe. What's the reason for Rebbe? Amar Rabavo says, Gamar chet mitruma. He learns from truma. Ma truma b'misa, af mila b'misa. Just like by truma, if a zar eats truma, there's he incurs the death penalty from heaven. So too, by me'ila, if he has enjoyment from hektish, he incurs a death penalty from heaven. Umine, and now we go the other way. Ma truma b'kazayas, af mila b'kazayas. 1 second. Where do you get the whole source of misa by me'ila? You got it from truma. But if you learn it from truma, then you're restricted to whatever the laws of truma are. The laws of truma are is that only if it's a kazayas, because it says yoichal, right? Yishki yoichal kaidash. Only if you eat it. So now, if I learn the halachas from,
what is the punishment azara? Is that malchus?
So
Means let's say.
Yeah, I believe that's just going to be malchus.
Because
azara means a lav. There's a negative prohibition.
So it's not just we're warning you, but there is a consequence ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just azara. Okay.
Yeah. So what comes out from here is that how could you tell me, this is Rav Chia Bar Avin, who suggested the answer to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that why do I need a pasuk to exclude a karban by me'ila, b'mezid, is because me'ila is stricter, because me'ila is even less than a kazayas. So Rav Chia Bar Avin says, why do you think that's a good answer? Me'ila is stricter, and therefore I need a pasuk to tell me that you don't need a karban, that you don't bring a karban by mezid. Why do you think that's a good answer, that me'ila is even less than a kazayas? Where do I learn me'ila, the halachas of me'ila b'mezid from, that it's b'misa, that I only learn according to Rebbe? And where does Rebbe learn it from? He learns it from Truma. The Chacham also have a limit from Truma as well. But I learn it from Truma. If you learn it from Truma, Truma says achila. Achila means kazayas. So me'ila should also be a kazayas. It's not a good. It's not a good source. It's not a good teretz. Maskef lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks, "Mimai the Rebbe k'Rabbanan tzrila." How do you know that Rebbe holds like the Rabbanan that say that it needs to be a kazayas? Dilma ka'abashal tzrila. Damar yesh b'shava prut afogav less b'kazayas. Maybe Truma itself doesn't need a kazayas. Maybe Truma itself only needs a shava pruta, like Abba Shal said. Ready? Now here's the question. Rav Papa Damar Dabashal Tarti Bai. Rav Papa was the one that told us that Abishal says you need both Kazayas and the Shava Pruta. That was his answer before. He said he was explaining a brisa that says that if you don't have a Kazayas, you still have to make a repayment, but you don't have to pay the Chaimesh. We said it doesn't fit with Abishal because Mimanavshach, is there a Shava Pruta or not? If there's a Shava Pruta, why doesn't he have to pay the Chaimesh? So we said that Rav Papa answered that Abishal holds that you need both, the Shava Pruta and the Kazayas. Comes along Rav Papa over here and says that Abishal holds that you only need a Shava Pruta, you don't need a Kazayas at all. That's Hadar Bey Rav Papa. Rav Papa retracted. Obviously, Rav Papa retracted from his explanation of Abishal. Okay. Now we say, Marbrei de Ravna Amar Hachi Kamar. What we're going to do now is we're just going to go back to this discussion. Why did we need a pasuk to tell me that Me'ila b'mezid doesn't bring a carbon? Why did he need a pasuk for that? We could have had a kal v'chaimer that I don't bring a carbon for chaylev and dam b'mezid, which is karis. I probably don't need a carbon also for Me'ila. So the Gemara has to respond to that.
Sorry, can I just go back for 1 second?
Yeah.
For the chachamim that require there to be a kazayas, right, and not a shava pruta. But if there's not a shava pruta, how do you pay? There's no way of paying. So they would require shava pruta too, right?
They didn't require a shava pruta. On truma, the repayment is food, so that wouldn't be an issue.
Okay.
You know, we had a discussion about the volume versus the value, right? Yesterday. Yeah. Yeah, the repayment is a special din that's what we were explaining, how you could make a payment for something that didn't have a na, that was asr ba'na, it doesn't have any value. We said no, the payment here is not the value, it's the volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it would fit, I guess.
Thank you.
We asked what did they do with Vanasan. We said Vanasan was teaching me something else. Okay. Hachi Kamar. This is Mar Berei de Ravna. He says that how do we get rid of that kal v'chaimer that would tell me that you don't need a carbon? So it goes like this. Lo imra amit b'shar mitzvahs shelo yasabem shem miskaven k'miskaven. We're looking for a chumrah in Me'ila that doesn't apply to other mitzvahs. And therefore, because of that chumrah, I would have thought, well, maybe Me'ila is mar chamer. Maybe what usually is said by other mitzvahs, which is that b'shegig there's a carbon, not b'mezid. Maybe by Me'ila, because of that chumrah, you have to bring a carbon b'mezid as well. Comes along the pasuk and tells me you don't. That's what we're trying to do. So what's the chumrah that we're going to have? So Mar Berei de Ravna says that other mitzvahs, shalayasabem she'im miskaven k'miskaven. If you didn't intend for it, then it's not considered a prohibition. For example, on Shabbos, shem niskaven lachtich esatalash v'chatach esamechuber. Shapater. Let's say you intended to cut something that was not attached to the ground, but you ended up cutting something that was attached to the ground. And therefore, that's considered harvesting. And you cut something off from the ground, and it should be a malacha. The only thing is, it wasn't your intention. So over there, you're pater. Timer b'me'ila. When it comes to me'ila, shem niskaven l'schamim b'gizei chulin v'nischamim b'gizei yoyla shema. Over there, even if you didn't intend, you put your hand inside some cold, right? Put your hand inside some wool. Now, the wool was shearings of wool that was from a chulin animal. But it turns out that what you did, you weren't looking, you put it into the one right next to it, which was the carbon animal. So, the gizei oila. So it was sanctified. So over there, there's a chiyuv of meila was b'shaygig, and yechayev. But this is different by other mitzvahs. By other mitzvahs, you'd be pater entirely. So you see that there's a chumrah by meila. So maybe the same thing should apply, that you should also be chayev a karban by mezid. It says no. Rav Nachman Yitzchak gives another suggestion, and his issue is that there's 3 levels of miskaven. There's miskaven by Shabbos, there's miskaven by other mitzvahs, and then there's miskaven by meila. By meila is the strictest. The Shabbos is the most lenient, because Shabbos, it says meleches machshavos. It needs to be mamish, have kavanah exactly for what you're doing. If you didn't have kavanah for that, then you're exempt. In other mitzvahs, it's somewhere in the middle. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, "Achi kamer, lo yimamrit b'shar mitzvahs keim lo mischayev b'hem shem misasik k'misasik." Not miskaven. Misasik. Misasik is a little different than miskaven, as you'll see right now. Shem niskaven like bias atolash v'chatachas mechuber. You didn't even intend to cut. You intended to lift something off from the floor. It was something on the floor. You lifted it up. While you're lifting it up, something happens and it gets cut. Shapater, over there you pater. Which this would be an exemption by other mitzvahs as well, even besides for Shabbos. You really didn't intend to do the action that you actually did. Over there, the first case by Mar Breder Avna, I intended for the action. I just cut the wrong item. Over here, I didn't even intend to cut. I intended to pick something up. So really, I should be pater even by other mitzvahs. Let's say you put your hand into something to take out an item. While you're going in, the vessel was greasy, had kodesh oil on it, and you had enjoyment shemal. Over there, you mal. That's very strict. That's very strict. So that would be a good source for me to think that I should be chayav a carbon even by mezid. The pasuk tells me that I'm not. Okay, those are other options of answering up, of explaining that brisa without saying that there's a difference between the way he thought originally that karis is stricter and at the end he thought misa was strict. Other ways of saying that there's a strictness to meila. Amar Mar. We're going back to something that we learned yesterday. He said, we're talking about someone that has Chumas Chametz on Pesach. Does he have to pay or not? There was a machlekes, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri held that you pay according to the measurement. Rabbi Akiva said you pay according to the value, and there was no value. Anyway, what this came out was they had a conversation of, do you have to pay for something? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says you have to pay for Truma Tmeya, even though you can't eat it. But if you if for whatever reason you did eat it or whatever, you have to pay for it. So he says, over there you could have burnt it, Rabbi Akiva tells him. So he responds, so that was the whole answer. But then it says, what you're talking about is something that doesn't have any value at all. For example, truma of berries or grapes, which you can't burn, which are usher because they're tameh. So there's no achila and there's no asaka. There's no burning and there's no eating. There's no value. Then the brisa concluded, and it said, when would we say that this is an issue? Only if you separated the truma first, so it was real truma. And then it became chametz. And then someone ate it. But if the separation of the truma was chametz, originally was chametz, then everyone holds that it never became holy. That's what we're going to discuss over here. Amar Mar, Master taught before in the brisa. When do we say that there's this discussion, do you have to pay for it or not? The depending on Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Yochanan Menuri, that's only if it was separated at a time when it could have become truma. But if you separate it when it's not edible, everyone holds that it's not truma. Now, when it says divrei hakol, it's actually referring to even Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili held that you are allowed to have benefits from chametz even on Pesach, but nevertheless, when I separate truma, it has to be edible. If we're talking about the repayment, then if there is a value to it, then everyone would agree that you have to repay. But the question is, was it considered truma in the first place? So that needs to be edible. You know, how do we know this? When you give truma, you give it to the kayan, but you give it to him to eat. You don't give it to him to be able to light on in his lamp. Masav Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua has a question on this. Just 1 second. Ein tarmin minat tameya l'tahira. You can't take truma from something that's tamei on produce that's tar v'im taram. But if you did, b'shoigeg truma se truma. If it wasn't intentional, b'diavad it works. V'amai, why does it work? Lema loy v'loy lahirai. You gave him something that he can't eat. The only thing he can do with it is to burn in his lamp. Shouldn't be truma according to him. Gemara says like kasha. It's not a question. A little bit of a difficult concept here. What he's saying is, actually, you have to read a little bit further. The answer is, did it ever have a time that it could have been edible as truma? So we're talking about by the chametz, it was never possible for it to be edible. What's the pshat? Before it got chametz. What do you mean? Before, it has to become chametz, right? That takes time. It says, what's the case? You're saying that it's not truma because it never had potential to be edible. How do you have a case like that? Because it was chametz. Well, how does that work? You're going to achmetz b'mechuber. We're talking about even before it was chayev in truma, because it was still attached to the ground. You only chayev to remove the truma. It's only considered tevel only after it's harvested and put into the granary. Over here, in the ground itself, somehow it was left there after it was already ripe. And the water goes on it, and it starts to sprout, and germinates, or whatever it's called. So it gets wet. It starts to rise. But if it got wet after it was harvested, hachinami the kadsha. Is probably a question. But if after it was harvested, you're going to say that it would be considered truma if you then took truma from there. Because when we read that brisa, we said, when do we say that it's considered truma? That's because it wasn't chametz yet. But once it's chametz, it doesn't even become truma. Now we're saying that even if it was chametz before, it's still truma. Why? Because if it didn't become chametz while it was attached to the ground, then it had a shasa kosher, and anything that had a shasa kosher, a moment when it could have been acceptable as truma, then it remains acceptable even afterwards. So is that going to be the case? Amalayin says yes, that would be the case. Quotes this pasuk in Daniel, B'gzeras irin piskamin. From a decree from the angels, Ubemaimar Kadisha Sheilta, and from a statement from the other angels, I guess, it was asked, and that's how they paskin. They paskin in the base medrash as well. This is a quote that means that that's the rule. It's the rule in heaven, it's the rule in the base medrash. Okay. Kiyasar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua, when Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua, he says that it's not going to be truma. It's not going to be truma. Amar Kra, if you take truma from something that's chametz, you separate it, and you say this belongs to the kohen, it's not truma. Not like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, or Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua in this discussion. It was from Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. It says Amar Kra Rashis, says you take the first. And it has to be the first, meaning shasharani currently Yisrael, that the rest could be eaten. What do you accomplish by truma? You remove a little bit, and then the rest becomes acceptable. But over here, when you remove a little bit, the rest isn't acceptable because it's chametz. So it doesn't have to do with if it ever had a shasa kosher or not. Yatzazu shein shirani kain. Over here, it doesn't work because you don't have the rest is not acceptable. Yosef Ravacha bar Rav Avia kamid Rav Chisda. Yosef Amish mid Rav Yechanan. This is a new discussion over here. Ravacha bar Rav Avia is sitting and he says over in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, he says it to Rav Chisda. Anavim shenitmu, grapes that are tamei. Darchan pachis mikabeya b'yenan kasher l'nesachim. If you squeeze them one by one, this would not be very efficient, but you take all the grapes, you put them in, you squeeze them. He says, the grapes are tummy, but I have a way of keeping the wine tar. As Rabbi Yechanan is saying in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. What you do is you squeeze them less than a kabeya. That means a kabeya is an egg. Over here, the grapes are smaller than an egg. Maybe a half, they're similar, more like an olive size, right? The grapes, I don't know what types, but they're probably smaller than an egg. Even big grapes are probably smaller than an egg. So you squeeze them less than a kabeya, and the juice that comes out isn't going to be tummy. Alma kasavar, the only way this is possible is if he holds mashkin mifkat pekidi, that the wine that's in the grapes is not really the grape. Yeah, the grape is a container for the wine, which means that the fact that the grape's tummy doesn't mean that the wine is tummy. I mean, there's different ways of looking at the wine that's in the grape. Do you look at it as grape, or do you look at it as wine? It's like Chassidus discusses the light that's in the luminary. Is it light over there, or is it just luminary, right? The or that's in the mud. So here, the wine that's in the grape, is it wine or is it grape? So here we're saying that it's wine, and the grape is tummy, but not the wine. Le'imas kamatami. When is the grape or when is the wine going to become tummy? L'chisachetlu. That's only when you squeeze it out. L'chisachetlu lesa l'shiri. When you squeeze it out, you don't have the shear. What can give tuma over to the wine? A kabeya of grape. But you're doing less than a kabeya. So the tumah can never be transferred over. You need a certain size to be able to get the tumah to transfer tumah. Rashi says even to become tummy, it needs to be the size. But whatever the case is, for sure to transfer tumah, it needs to be a kabeya. The Gemara says, Hihachi, kabeya nami. If that's the case, then even if it's actually a kabeya, it's also not a problem. Why? We're going to say that when you squeeze it out, it gets smaller. Even if you take a kabeya, but as you squeeze it, at the moment you squeeze it, you've just lost the kabeya. So let's see. The Hatanan, it was taught in the Mishnah, tummy mace. If you have a person that was in contact with a corpse, it became tummy. That he squeezes grapes or olives, exactly a kabeya. Tahirit, what comes out is tar. The Gemara says, Hasam de'i avad. That's not talking about telling you what to do. That's talking about what he did. Hacha lechatchila. Over here, Rabbi Yechanan is saying how to do it lechatchila. Take less than a kabeya lechatchila. Gezeira dilmasi lemevad yesim kabeya. It's not a kasha. You're right. If you would have done it, you're right. It would have been less than a kabeya. After you squeeze it, it becomes less. But Rabbi Yechanan was saying how to do it. How to do it lechatchila. Take less. Amli Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says to Ravacha bar Rav Avia, very surprising expression. It says, Man tzayis lachal Rabbi Yechanan Rabbah. Who cares to listen to you and Rabbi Yechanan, your teacher? Who's going to listen to you? They were tummy before. Where did the tumah disappear to? The grapes were tummy. The Gemara explains this conversation between Rav Chisda and Ravacha bar Rav Avia. Alma kasavar, it must be Rav Chisda holds, mashkin nivli bli, that the liquid is part of the grape. When the grape is tummy, the liquid's tummy. Once the grape is tummy, then the liquid that's there is also tummy. It's all one item. Amalei, so Rabbi Achat says, Batlei Tizbra, the Mashkin Mifkad Pkidi. You don't hold that the liquid that's inside is really just contained, and it's not really part of the grape. It's just being held there. It doesn't have to do. It's not a physical concept. It's a theoretical concept. Yeah. It's like, how do you view it? It's it's not like experimentation is going to change this. But it was taught in the Mishnah. It's tahar when the tummy mace squeezes out exactly a kabeya. Why? Because it gets less than the size. If you say that the liquid was never tummy, then granted. But if you say that the liquid is part of the grape, then why is it tar? It was tummy before. However, the grapes became tummy, the liquid becomes tummy. We're talking about that the grapes never became wet. Wow. We're talking about a tummy mace squeezing grapes. The grapes aren't tummy. When are the grapes going to become tummy? Only when they get wet. Only when the liquid comes out and then they get wet. And at that moment, when you squeeze it, it doesn't have a shear. So don't tell me that you have a raya from there, that the liquid inside the grape isn't really part of the grape. It's really only contained in there, and therefore it's not tummy. That's not the reason why it's not tummy. The reason why it's not tummy is because the grapes were never wet. And the grapes were never tummy. We didn't actually discuss the tum on the grapes. We just discussed the person was tummy, squeezing grapes. What's with the grapes? We left out that detail. Once you squeeze it, there's no shear. Because if you're not going to say this, Hadatanya, this stuff was taught in the Brisa. That's an amazing thing. Remember in that conversation between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that if someone eats Truma Tmeya, he has to pay. So Rabbi Akiva says back, yeah, but over there's value, because over there you can burn it in your lamp. What you're telling me is something that has no value at all, because it's chametz. And so he says, tell me, what could you do if someone has tamei berries or tamei grapes, which you can't burn, you can't do anything with? It has zero value. How does he pay that back? This is 1 second. You mentioned tamei grapes, tamei berries. Let's discuss this a little bit more. 1 second. He says, really? You could eat it. Why? You squeeze it. You could squeeze it less than a kabeya. You can get the food out of it. What's Rabbi Kiva saying? That there's no value. If you hold that it's mifkad pekide, that the liquid is contained in the air and you can squeeze it out in a way that it would be tar. So what's Rabbi Kiva saying? That it has no value? It's much more than value. You could actually eat it, squeeze it out in small amounts, and you could eat and drink the juice. Obviously, if it's tamei, it's entirely tamei, including the juice. Rava says it's not a real proof. Why? Because gezeira bilmasalu b'dei takala. We don't let you squeeze it out like that, because you may end up squeezing more and it's going to become tamei. Amalei Abaya michashina letakala. Abaya says, do we suspect that there may be a takala, that it may become tamei and you'll eat it? But Tanya madlikin b'pasa b'shem shel truma shenitmeis says you're allowed to burn bread and truma and oil that's tamei, and we're not concerned that you're going to eat it. Why are you telling me over here there's a concern if you're going to squeeze it out in a way, maybe it's going to become tamei and you're going to eat it? You see, you're not concerned about that. Over there, you're making sure that you're doing it in a way that you're never going to come to eat it, because the bread, you're throwing it amongst the wood, and the oil, you're putting it into a vessel that you're never going to eat from. So over there's a way of avoiding that takala. But when it comes to squeezing the grapes and squeezing the berries, over there we have a concern that you may end up making a tamei and eating it. let's leave it over here.